Hello everyone and welcome to the tiebreaks of the World Chess Championship match. After 14 games of classical chess we have a tie and now we have to play 4 rapid games. It's 25 minutes plus 10 seconds per player and 4 games will be played. If that is a draw, then we go into blitz games, and then if the blitz games are a draw, then we go into sudden death. This is the first game of the rapids. Ding has the white pieces. Let's see what happened in this one. So Ding with the white pieces opens with d4. We have knight to f6, knight to f3, d5, and now pawn to c3. A very rare continuation, but as you probably already have suspected, it has been played by a very strong player, none other than his second Richard Rapport. So let's see what they prepared. Pawn to c5, we have d captures on c5, pawn to e6, and now bishop to e3. Ding says, although usually you can never keep your pawn when you capture it, but this is now rapid chess, it's up to you to figure out how to properly capture it back. Bishop to e7, and now we have pawn to g3. There are some other top-tier games that reach this position, like Vladimir Kramnik had it against Boris Gelfand last year, but the game that we are focusing on is Rapport versus Samuel Shanklin from 2019. And here we have knight to c6, and with this move Nepo deviates from all of those games, and it is now as of move 6 that we have a completely new game. So Ding goes bishop g2, we have castles, and now pawn to b4 just keeps that pawn nicely defended, and now, well, a4 b5 is coming, and what does Nepo have to show for his position being down a pawn? He goes knight to g4, says that bishop does not belong there, let's go after it. We have bishop to d4, and now queen to c7. If you're wondering why not just e5, isn't this just winning for black? Looks really spectacular. The problem is h3, and now after e captures on d4 and captures here, the semi-open file for white is a bit too much. For example, you capture here, now even b5 challenges the knight. After the knight moves, you're going to capture on c3, then the queen comes to d3, goes after the h7 pawn. Looks very scary. So that's why queen to c7 by Jan, and now we have castles by Ding. And now the Ding castled, Yang just gave him a look and said, all right, but now you kind of won't have the semi-open h file, and he does go for it. Pawn to e5. We have h3 now. Ding challenges the knight here. E captures on d4, h captures on g4, d captures on c3, and now knight captures on c3. The problem is if you play b5, there's the in-between bishop to f6 move, and this just looks very ugly. Now if b captures pawn to c2, attacks the queen and the rook on a1. So instead, after d captures on c3, just knight captures, and now knight captures on b4 here. We have pawn to a3 chasing away the knight, and now not doing anything weird. Like queen captures on c5 looks great for you to trade the knights. The problem is there's knight to a4, attacks the queen. Next move you capture the knight, and the knight here is defended. So this would be a blunder for black. So that's why Nepo just puts the bishop on this diagonal where it belongs. Rook to c1, bishop captures on c3, rook captures, and now just knight back to c6. And we have this position, equal material. Let's see how they continue. And now Ding has to decide. Does he want to give up the g4 pawn? Does he want to capture on d5? Does he want to play something weird like queen to a4 to guard the g4 pawn? Maybe focus on d5 as a long-term weakness? Well, after some considering, Ding does go for queen captures on d5. Even though queen to a4 is the top engine move, Ding decides for a practical game, queen to d5 will offer him better chances. Bishop captures on g4, and now knight to g5. The situation on the clock is 17 minutes for Ding and 20 minutes for Nepo, and you can see now that weird stuff is happening here. Again, like in the previous game, Ding puts a knight on g5, and now the queen can come to d3, to e4, threaten that checkmate. For example, if you play something like rook a to e8, just ignore white, queen to d3, threatens checkmate. Now you could play g6, but then knight comes to e4, and you're hoping to get the knight to d6, but you will stop it with something like queen to e5. And now after, of course you cannot move because the e2 pawn would hang. After e3, you will stop knight d6 with bishop to f5, and this is maybe the safest way to go about this for black. But h6 was played right away, and now Ding says, all right, knight to e4. You could also try an in-between move with queen to e4 to sort of trade like this, but Ding feels that it's much more important to bring the knight to d6. So rook a to e8, and now pawn to e3. Ding feels that you don't need to give anything, you are bringing your knight to d6. Rook e5, and now queen to d2. We have rook to d8, the continuing harassment on Ding's queen, knight to d6 now. And if you look at the position now, Ding's position is absolutely spectacular. And how is Nepo to defend the b7 pawn? That pawn will be under attack, but Nepo finds a way. He just plays rook to h5. Absolutely brilliant. Just shows how much kingside weaknesses Ding has. And now imagine if this knight comes to f3. If this knight lands on f3 with check, it's game over. And here, Ding is actually winning, but it's really hard to see in a classical game. You have to play queen to c2, followed by queen to b3, and go after the b7 pawn. Ding does that, just not with the queen. Ding plays rook to b1, but the problem is now that he will not have this f4 move when the time comes. The problem is if you play queen to c2, and now Nepo plays knight to e5, you have f4, because the bishop and the rook are guarding the f3 square. However, here after rook to b1, the rook will not help with the support of the f3 square, and now Nepo just goes knight e5, and he says, feel free to capture on b7, and if Ding does this, it's game over. Just knight f3 check, and doesn't matter what you do, you are getting checkmated on h1. You can even capture black's queen. Rook to h1 will be checkmate. So after knight e5, we have e4. This is how Ding defends the f3 square, but it still gives Nepo a bit too much. He plays pawn to b6. Like in the previous game where Ding played pawn to b6, here b6 is the absolute strongest move for Nepo. And now the problem is, how do you defend? You could try something like f4, but then knight to f3 check. Look at this, bishop captures on f3. Now rook captures on c5, and after rook captures on c5 and queen captures, you will play queen to f2 as the white king was in check. Queen captures on f2 with check, king captures, bishop captures on f3, and now e5. You defend your knight, let's say bishop to g4, and the game continues with Nepo being up a pawn. So, although very nice, it still leaves Nepo in a better position. So Ding goes for the absolute main line of the position, and that is c captures on b4. He opens attack on Nepo's queen, but Nepo just plays a captures on b6, and he gives up his queen. But again, if the rook leaves control of the f3 square, it's once again game over. Knight f3 check. If you capture, you just get checkmated, so you have to move the king, and then comes knight captures with check, king to e1, even rook captures on d6, guards the knight, so absolutely crushing. Black is up a full knight. Of course, you just resign this. So Ding plays knight to b5, absolute strongest move. And look at this, now black queen is hanging, white queen is hanging, everything is hanging. Is this a World Chess Championship game? Yes, it is. And while Nepo could decide something like queen to e7, and maybe he should have, he was much better on time here, he decides to trade. He plays rook captures on d2, knight captures on c7, and now bishop to h3. It seems like the critical line was knight to d3, to go after the f2 pawn, and now after rook to f1 defending this pawn, just rook to c5. And it looks like it's not easy for white to find moves. Maybe this was the way to go. Of course, white has knight to d5, the rook is nicely defended, you will never capture, of course, give black a pass pawn. So it's, definitely one of the possibilities. But he played bishop to h3, and now we have bishop captures, rook captures, king to g2, and now just rook back to h5. But Ding counters back with rook to b5. Now you cannot move the knight. And while g6 is definitely an option, it looks very scary. Look at this, knight to d5, now coming for knight to f6 check. And now look at this, knight to g4 guards this square and threatens rook captures on f2, king f3. And now what would be possible is this knight sacrifice and then just a nice draw by repetition. Of course, you can't go here because of checkmate. You have to play king h3, and then we would probably have a nice draw by repetition. But instead, rook to d1 was played. Now comes knight to d5 and rook d to h1. This is how Nepo goes for Ding's king. But of course, now, you can see that there is no other conclusion to this game other than knight to e7 check, king to h7, and the rook captures on e5. This is how Ding goes for it, because now if Nepo captures, he also loses the rook on h1. So a repetition is a must here. Rook 1 to h2 check, king to g1, rook h1 check, king to g2. And he was in this position on move 35 that Nepo and Ding agreed to a draw, as there is nothing more to be done here. The problem is if you go to f3, then Nepo can capture, because now the rook is no longer hanging, and of course Ding cannot afford that, so he of course settles for a repetition. So game 1 of the Rapids ends in a draw. Next game Nepo has the white pieces. We'll see what happens. Will we have a new world champion in Rapid, or will it have to be decided in Blitz? Stay tuned and find out. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And when I say soon, I definitely mean soon. See you soon.